everyone, and welcome to a new episode of What the Field, a podcast by Crowd Farming, where we get to chat to lots of different people from different fields who all work towards the same goal of regenerating and creating a more resilient future for us all. So today we're joined by Bastien Sachet from Earthworm. Thank you so much for joining us in person,
Thank you.
Bastien. So nice to have you here in our offices. Why don't we just go ahead and start with a quick intro of who you are, what you do, what is Earthworm, and what's the story of Earthworm?
Okay, that's 5 questions in one,
Yeah,
but that's okay.
I like to start off really big.
No, thanks for the invitation. Very happy to be here and taking the opportunity to be going through Madrid to visit you. So my name is Bastien Sachet. I'm French. I grew up in Normandy and in a rural setting, and I guess that's where I started to like and be in touch with nature, spending lots of times getting bored. We didn't have phones at the time. And then I wanted to travel, so I thought agriculture and tropical agronomy would be a good thing to learn. Actually, I didn't study that. I studied agronomy, but normal agronomy, and then business. And then I ended up traveling into various countries like Brazil, the UK, where in the UK I took interest into soils, and I realized that people are putting too much fertilizer. I was selling fertilizer to give you an idea, and I saw that it was not doing any good to the grasses, to the the clover was disappearing. The farmers were paying more fertilizer, and the cows were sick with acidity and things like that. I thought there's something wrong, but then I kept moving on, and I ended up one day in Argentina in soybean fields, GM soy with lots of pesticide, and I thought there's something wrong. So that's when I shifted and I joined what Earthworm was called at the time, the Forest Trust, and 18 years later I'm still here, leading the organization with lots of joy.
Wow, so that's such a long time, 18 years with the Forest Trust, which is now Earthworm. What was that journey like for Earthworm? And actually, just out of curiosity now, what was the name change about?
Yeah, so basically Earthworm, just to precise, it's a non-profit, a foundation, Swiss foundation, that international, that has as an objective to regenerate soils and forests for and with people. And the particularity of Earthworm is that we work very much with businesses in supply chains, because we think that the market leverage and the products that everyone buys, the consumers, the buyers, the industries, have a lot of leverage over how things are being done in the field. And so we use that leverage to drive change. Earthworm was the Tropical Forest Trust when I joined, and it was an organization created by an Australian called Scott Poynton, who was a forester in Asia for a long time. And he realized that a lot of the good forestry practices were supported by aid projects. Okay, and so if the project would last 5 years, for the first years it would go well. People would do trainings and improve the way they would manage the forest. But then when the money runs out, nothing happens. And at the end of the 90s, everyone wanted a teak table. Everyone wanted a nice flooring. And it was the beginning or the boom of globalization. So all the retailers in Europe were buying cheap wood products from Asia, and doing lots of good business with that. And the NGOs started, like the Global Witnesses, the Greenpeace, started to raise awareness around the problems that it was creating on the other side. So the deforestation, the forest degradation, showing pictures of animals and degraded forests, and this, and then having campaigns in Europe, burning garden furniture on the car parks of B&Q in the UK or Leroy Merlin, these kind of companies. And so Scott came with the idea saying, okay, guys, you're buying, 2,000, 3,000 containers of wood every year. What if you use that leverage to transform the way the forests are managed on the other side? Do you know the forest where the teak is coming from? Oh, no, we don't. I think you should know. What is your policy in terms of sourcing wood? Oh, we don't have a policy. We buy the cheapest. Okay. And so he started to say, okay, if we ask questions, where is it produced? How is it produced? Who produced? We get the traceability back to the forest, and then we work with the forest, we can really transform. And that's how the TFT was born. Working with those companies and gaining an experience in value chains. But then after a while, we realized that, the forests were getting hammered, of course because of timber, but not just timber. Palm oil, cocoa, soybean, all the agricultural products that were also going in supply chains towards lots of countries around the world. So we started to take interest in that, and I was very happy because as an agronomist, that was a bit closer to my heart, even if I love forests as well. And then we thought, actually, we're not forest experts. What we are good at is understanding the way value chains work and how we can get people to collaborate within that value chain. We realized that at the end, the buyer in Europe maybe was asking just for a specification and a very low price. And this was the message going all along the supply chain. So at the end, what do? You extract value from the forest. You extract value from the people who are harvesting the forest. But if you start to get these guys to work together on how we can do better from an environmental and social quality standpoint, it's the same thing than when you start to get them to talk, to do better when they want to improve, I don't know, the color of the chair, the size, how it folds, these kind of things. People talk to each other to get to that quality. They could talk to each other to get to that environmental and social quality. So that's what we realized we were good at. And so we started to investigate a little bit the field around these other commodities. And then Nestlé got attacked by Greenpeace in 2010. A massive campaign, I don't know if you remember, but it was around the Kit Kat. And the Kit Kat were like 2 fingers of an orangutan cut with blood and everything. It was really a powerful campaign. And the executive in Nestlé were a bit puzzled. They were like, what should we do? We're a member of the United Nations program. We've got the certification labels, etc. But still, there is deforestation happening. And Greenpeace had captured some satellite images that were evidencing the problem. And we said the same thing. We said, well, you should try to get a policy that reflects your values. What do you want your palm oil to be made of? And the answer should not be, we are a member of this round table of that. No, what do you want? And clearly the COO at the time, a Spanish guy called Jose Lopez at the time, very powerful guy, said, well, we don't want deforestation, that's for sure. We are Nestlé and we are not going to support that. It's just that we didn't know. And at the time we told them, so why don't you write it in a policy? And this was the first no deforestation policy that was written by a company, which is the biggest food company in the world. And it set the bar to all the suppliers saying, okay, guys, now you need to do that. I remember going to Singapore and meeting some of those suppliers who had been, clearing forests with bulldozers and just planting palm oil because it was good business, and saying, well, we should do no deforestation. What does it mean? And so we worked with Greenpeace, with scientists, with the companies to say, how can we find a balance between clearing all the forest and planting palm, but on the other hand, allowing Indonesian people to develop and have their crops. And so that's something very important in Earthworm history, is that the world's not black and white. And on one side we had Greenpeace who didn't want to cut a single tree because we should not touch the forest. The world is in such a bad place that we need to, every tree counts. And on the other hand, we had the Indonesians saying, hey guys, you've done that in Europe, you've cleared all your forest, let us clear and let us make money. And so we found a compromise where the most precious forest, the most dense forest needed to be conserved, but those that are a bit more degraded, because they've been harvested a lot for wood, etc., could be converted into plantation. And that became a methodology that is now used in every single no deforestation policy. And the fascinating thing is that after Nestlé did that, many other companies started to do the same. They started to have their own policy, try to find out where the palm oil comes from, engage with their suppliers, etc., etc., etc. 14 years later, I would say that almost 100% of the industry is traceable to all the mills that exist all around the planet, and now it's getting traceable to plantation. Europe is issuing a regulation on deforestation. All the plantations are tracked by satellite. I mean, there's been an immense progress done. So when we look at that, we're like, okay, we didn't do it all, but we played a role in facilitating a dialogue and innovating at a moment where innovation was needed. it's a bit of a long story to talk about
It's a
earthworm.
great story there. It's fascinating.
But what happened is that when we started to work on a lot of different raw materials, we realized, as I said, that our expertise, our know-how, was to get people to work together. And we thought, well, it's very much like what the earthworm does in the soil. The earthworm is working between the surface and the depth, between the mineral horizon and the organic horizon, between the aerobic, where there is oxygen, and anaerobic, where there's no oxygen. And it keeps moving between those two worlds that are very different, that don't talk to each other. But it makes them communicate and mix. A bit like an emulsifier, I would say. Mixing water and oil and trying to make, a mayonnaise or something like that. And it takes time and takes effort, but when it works, it's quite magical. And so what the earthworm does in the soil is the same, and it creates humus, it creates life from things that are dead, dead matter and rocks. And so what we thought is, that's exactly what we do in the supply chain. We talk to buyers and farmers, and we corporate and small farmers, how can they talk together? How can they work together? Buyers and suppliers. Sometimes in the field, companies and communities that have land disputes. And often they are in opposition, because through the commercial relationship, it's a fight to get your price. And we know how farmers demonstrate all over the place to get better prices. And on the other hand, I would say the supermarket will fight to get the lowest prices to the consumers, and it's always a trade-off. But when they start to work together on common projects that are of higher interest, like the health of forest, the health of soils, the overall quality of what they do, then things start to change. And we thought, that's us. So at the same time, I also thought it's great to work on forests, but a lot of what happens on forest starts in what happens on soils. And when you look at climate change, biodiversity collapse, it's all about soils and forest. Every product we consume comes from a soil or a forest. The pullovers, the chair, everything that we eat, consume is coming from a soil or a forest or a mine.
Yeah.
But we thought, rather than talking about complex things like carbon, biodiversity, which are a bit abstract to people, we like to be concrete. And if we can't say what we say to a farmer and he understands it, it means too complex. So we thought, okay, our job is to work on the health of soils and forest with and for the people who are working there. And that's how we decided to change the name Earthworm. It happened when I took over the leadership of the organization back in 2018. And initially it was a bit difficult because people were thinking, it's a bit disgusting, an earthworm, But little by little, the earthworm has become more popular over the last years. Yeah. And we are happy in that skin.
I find it interesting about your story that we have the misconception that it's all about price, that these big companies are always about having really low prices on the sourcing, but you managed to find the right person that seemed to really care about not destroying forests. Do we have a misconception that all big companies care about is price and money and profits? And you're working with many of these companies. What's the reality behind all of these companies? There's people, and they might care about how the way you said it, like the higher good or
I often say we don't work with companies. We work with people in companies. And they are very different from whatever values they have, etc. Of course, there is a company culture, and after a while, some companies have adopted some principles and keep them and make them, a priority. Often after crisis, so maybe they will put the accent on security, or they will put the accent on, diversity. They have their topics, and but we believe at the end it always starts from a leader, or it always starts from someone in a company, and it can be at various levels. It's not always the boss. Sometimes it starts at a lower level in the hierarchy. And as we say in people, there is always a good and a bright and a dark side. This is the way I see the world. It's never 1 or 0, and we all have a bright and a dark side if we are honest with ourselves. And by knowing that, when you see someone, you're not judging him. So when we see someone in a company is not because he's working for a big corporation, and that big corporation maybe has done bad things somewhere. You know, if you take Nestlé, they are criticized about the water, about the baby milk, etc. But we believe that that person we are speaking to, that person is not evil. That person is a person with choices and things that she
And
or he needs to do.
from the company.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
They have pressures, they have
Shareholders, yeah.
KPIs, they have different things. So we try to understand what's our environment and what is leading that person to make decisions. But also we try to talk to, that's the brain part, but we try to talk to the heart. And sometimes they are so disconnected from the issues that it's just about getting in the field, seeing the farmers, and sometimes the farmers talk to you and it's like, you know, it's really a struggle for me to do that. And it clicks. The human speaks to the other human, and they're like, okay, I understand you, and I have, I don't know, empathy, compassion, respect, and I want to work to get that to work. And so that's what we do. Sometimes you have humans who really don't care, and that happens. And sometimes we work with companies really well, and the humans we were working with the company go, or they are hired by someone else. Someone change, and it doesn't go well because that person doesn't care or has other priorities. Okay, that happens, and we try to keep going because we feel that more and more people in company are realizing that. But I want to add something. It's not just about values and the desire to do good. I think there is also a very pragmatic interest in companies taking interest in their supply chain. The first one is to ensuring supply. Because if you are able to ensure supply, in a time where climate is changing, you have an advantage.
We know very well about that.
You know that.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it's about recreating long-term relationship with suppliers that are beneficial in many, many ways. The second thing is about controlling your quality. And when quality is not just anymore just the taste of the product or the color, when it's also the traceability, is it deforestation or not, the carbon footprint, the biodiversity footprint, the farmer's wage. It's a lot of things that are traveling together with the ton of grain or the ton of fruit. And so you don't find this anywhere. You need to build it, you need to cultivate it, you need to invest in it. And I think that is also something that companies are realizing. With their brand, they sell a quality, they sell a story, they sell something more than just a ton of something. And I think for these two reasons, they are also pragmatically interested in working on the supply chains.
Yeah. And at the beginning of your story, you were telling us that that the founder was Australian, right?
Yes.
That both you and him at the beginning, you worked in a lot of different countries, be LATAM, etc. What brought you to Europe? Like, are you working in Europe now and in sourcing and working with companies that source in Europe? And how is the problem different here? Because I guess the laws are very different. Yeah.
So for the story, he is Australian, but he based himself in Europe quite early because the first members were retailers in Europe. Okay. So there was a basis in Europe, but mostly as a country that buys products from the outside. Okay. But then when we started to work on soils, we started in the north of France. Okay. And we thought, okay, let's understand, how farmers could move towards more, I would say, conservation practices towards the management of their soil. And we went to Nestlé and we said, okay, Nestlé, what are you doing on soils? And this was in 2017. Well, soils is 0.5, 0.6 of our good agricultural practices. So basically, we're not doing anything in particular. At the time, they were mostly concentrated on other aspects, the pesticides, the levels, etc. And I thought, okay, but we would love to work on soil, and we think you should work on soils. And I remember the CEO at the time, he told me, yeah, okay, let's put our boots and I go with you to see soils one day. So we went. One morning, I remember, very cold. The farmer had prepared a little Nescafe so that, the COO of Nestlé wouldn't be cold and would be happy. And it worked. And he came on the field, and we invited another professor called Pascal Boivin. He's a soils professor. And together, we looked at soils, we listened to the farmer, and the CEO said, okay, let's do a pilot project. Let's see what we can do. And we got a very small budget to work in the north of France because he said, at one condition, it needs to be in our supply chain. So they sent us to their one of their brands that buy potatoes in the north of France. And we started and I remember it was in January 2018, we did a little meeting in a sports hall in a village. There was 25 people. And we started to talk about the idea of doing more conservation practices. And then I remember out of the 20 farmers, probably 17 just looked at us saying, "How much are you going to pay us? We're not going to do anything." And then I tried to explain why, etc. And in the back of the room, there were 3 farmers who said, "Look, come to our farm. We're already doing these practices, and if you do something, we want to be part of it." So we started the first group of 12 farmers. And from there, we learned a lot. How to measure soil health, or to support farmers in that transition, what's missing from an economic incentivization point of view. And we did a little mayonnaise. And little by little, we started to say, okay, but we need to involve not just the potatoes, but the other crops of the rotation. So we went to see Lidl, and we went to see McCain and Purina, other brands who joined the work in that region. And then little by little, we created an initiative called Living Soils and started to engage more in Europe with different actors and brands who, in the meantime, around 2020, made climate commitments, which related them much more to their ingredients. When they looked at their carbon footprint, they were like, oh, 60% of our carbon footprint is our agricultural ingredients. We need to take a look at regenerative agriculture, which then became very popular. And so we used that energy, I would say, and that interest to engage with the companies, corporates we've been working with to say, hey guys, we can help you in having a positive impact. And that's what led us to different countries in Europe doing different types of projects on different raw materials.
And what are the numbers now? How many farmers are you working with?
So I would say in Europe, we're working with about 800 farmers in total in various supply chains.
Different crops. Yeah.
Different crops, so it goes from wheat, barley, potatoes, vegetables, corn, mostly arable crops, but a bit of milk as well in Portugal and in France, and cotton as well in Greece. I mean, different crops that go into some kind of supply chain at some stage. Okay. And we work with about 10 large companies, the likes of PepsiCo, Nestlé, Lidl, companies that are committed to act on their supply chains, McDonald's, some companies like that. And then we work with their suppliers. So a lot of the cooperatives that are supplying the grains, or the industries that supply the sugar, for example, that we engage them and work with the farmers that supply them.
And what are kind of the big numbers and results on the soils that you're looking at into these farms? Yeah.
So in general, we see that soils in arable crops, annual crops, have been fairly degraded. So the organic matter levels are quite low. So we find 1%, which shows that they are lacking what they had before, which is a lot of the polyculture, the mix between the cattle raising and crops. And this has very much split in many regions in Europe where you have only arable crops. So they've been exhausting the raw materials, and by working the soil a lot, this is the second observation, the structure of the soil is degraded. And so the life in the soil is low in general. I'm speaking in general. And so what we try to trigger is to cover the soil again, is to do simple things that get the farmer moving. And as he does that, he starts to see visual results and things start to improve. What we realize, the big 2 conclusions, I would say, is that one, it takes time, and a lot of training and awareness raising and spending time with the farmer, not selling him products like most of people who spend time with farmer do, but really discussing about his system. And 2, it needs, I say, a safety net for the farmer to take the risk to move from a system he knows, he understands, and he pilots well, and for which he gets subsidies, and I'm talking about Europe, to a system where there's a lot of unknown. The institutions are not yet following that system, so he's a bit the first one exploring the jungle, if you want. Yeah. And he needs to find his way, find the knowledge, and find and take the risk. When you buy a cover crop, I don't know, 80 euros a hectare. I mean, if you fail, you lose,
Yeah.
and you get nothing for it. So having the whole economic incentivization around is fundamental for the farmer to succeed and to get that transition at a larger scale.
Yeah, I think that's something that we see as well on our side. But first of all, I think it's a really refreshing discourse to talk about big brands and companies as these people, what we were saying earlier, right? Because I think I'm like the first guilty person to always just associate the names, even just you saying like Nestle, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, and me thinking, oh, the bad guys,
Yeah.
like those are the ones we want to like stay away from and not work with. And when you were saying that there is also this more pragmatic side from their part as to why they're getting involved in these projects, I'm curious to know how much of it is also kind of consumer driven, so that they're interested in these topics because their consumers are more interested in these topics, and how much of it is because of that, and how much of it is because they genuinely want to like engage with their supply chain and all the things you were talking about.
I think it's a mix of all. It's a mix of all because I don't see consumers running to buy Doritos or to buy Nestle breakfast cereal saying, I really want them to be sustainable because otherwise I won't buy. Not really. Especially in Europe at the moment, we see rather the opposite movement of let's get me the cheaper stuff because there's inflation and there's so many things to buy for a family that if you can save on something, you'll be better off. That's not what I think, but that's what I observe. And then what we see is that the share of the money in the household dedicated to food is decreasing, unfortunately. And so I would not say that the consumers are massively asking. They are aware. It is important to them, but it needs to be explained in a simple way. And it's not so easy to explain conservation agriculture or regenerative agriculture in a simple way to the consumers. I think there are investors behind those companies that are pushing for the long-term vision, saying, you guys need to make sure you will have products tomorrow. And what we see is massive disruptions. And if you don't, as a Nestlé or as a McDonald's, really care about that, it's going to be hurting you and hurting us investors at some time, at some stage. That's a very powerful driving factor. Sometimes very much along the carbon angle, but still it's a good excuse to get into agriculture. And I think the leadership of those companies have, over time, become aware of, and I'm talking about the people again, become aware of how important it is. I know Nestlé is thinking about, there's probably more nutritional value when you have a healthy soil, a healthy crop. How can we transfer that to the consumers into not just a story about the sustainability, but more tangible benefits that are associated to doing things better? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. And so I think it's a very interesting movement. Companies see the benefit as well with their staff. So if you have a real purpose as a company that is beyond just making money, and a genuine purpose, like let's use our products to regenerate farms, not being naive here, but it attracts people to work with them. So it's also a way to sustain yourself as a company. So I think it's a mix of all these factors that are driving people in that direction. And I think you just have to look at the news, the climate disruption, and if you're someone who with a bit of vision, you think, we need to do something. We can't stay, watching, the car in the headlights, stuck in the headlights. We need to do something. And I think these companies have often leaders with a brand that function well and that thinking, we need to do something. We need to take our share.
I think nowadays we're seeing more and more NGOs working for the private sector, and I think that's a great idea, like you explained at the beginning. But I guess many years ago, this was super disruptive. And how did you manage to find this middle ground and be able to be taken seriously by both these big companies and NGOs like Greenpeace that are much more on the activist side?
Yeah. It's a very good question. I think if I take the metaphor of the earthworm again, if the earthworm spends all its time in the leaves and the branches at the surface and never goes down, it's not going to create any good soil. And so it's not going to be useful to the soil. And if soil would be a society, you would eliminate the earthworm. It's useless. It's not doing its job. So if we were to spend all our time where there is food, where companies give you money to do things, we would not do our job well as an earthworm. We would not add value to the ecosystem. There are plenty of consultants already doing that. What would we bring on top of what already exists? Companies prefer working with a McKinsey or with a Deloitte or these kind of folks, not Earthworm. So for us, it's been always key to maintain a dialogue and hear both parts, because as we see the world as not black or white, as a gray kind of color, we need to get a bit of white and a bit of black into the mix to create the painting. And so that concretely it means spending time listening and hearing the perspective of each of the parties. I was recently in a call with Rainforest Action Network, campaigning NGOs who is very active in Indonesia, and they bring things on the table that if you spend your life with companies, you don't hear, or you can't hear anymore because they think they are biased and they are politically supporting some movements, etc. There's always a good reason why what the other is saying is wrong. And so by spending time with both and hearing their perspective, we get this mix of views. That's one. The second thing is we try to be transparent about what we do. So there's nothing to hide. We're not trying to sell a story or create. Anyone can come anytime to any of the projects that we do in the world. And we've taken that for granted, not for granted, but as a fundamental rule that we should be able to open what we do to anyone, anytime. So sometimes NGOs visit our projects, or sometimes companies, and you see what you see.
And you have the track record to.
And then we build the experience, exactly the track record that we can be trustworthy, and which means that sometimes we pull out of relationship with companies, even if they want to pay us. And that has also been seen by NGOs as a mark of trust and reliability. And we did that with a few companies. We don't advertise it because we don't want companies to feel bad, but we do it.
Sometimes it has to be done.
Can I ask what are kind of one red line that you would say, I wouldn't go there, make you not work with a company?
So the red line is mostly when a company says it's going to do something and it doesn't do it. Okay. So I'll give you an example. We're working with a company at the moment that has operations that are infringing a bit the community land. We've made a policy of zero intimidation, zero encroachment, but still the management's still doing that. And our teams, the local NGOs, are saying, look, there's security guards, they're harvesting the timber where they should not, and we don't understand because they've got a policy, you've supported them to make the policy, and they're still doing it. And now we're like to the company, no, we can't work with you if you keep doing that. You have one word. So this is for an example of situation that will trigger a disengagement or a very tough conversation that leads the company to transform. Or we've had example where we can see that the company is operating beyond the natural limits. Again, on forestry in Canada, we had an example recently saying you can't, we did the assessment, we see the harvesting volumes are too high compared to what the forest should have to regenerate. And we say, you can't continue. And they're like, yeah, we need to continue a little bit, And then on the side, they do some sustainability speech. We pull out and we stop the work with them.
And so how does that work then to start the conversations with companies? Because you said you're working with like 10, more or less 10 big companies now. Is it like, do you go to them to try and recruit them, or do they come to you? How does the relationship start?
So I said 10 for Europe and regenerative agriculture, but in general, we work with about 100 companies around the world, big and small. Often they come to us. So I would say that we are more like a guide, like a mountain guide. And the mountain guide who has experience in climbing the mountain is never going to say, come with me and doing marketing and advertising. He shares what he does, and if people are inspired, are willing to climb the mountain, which is a bit of an effort, it's not a product, they come to him or her and say, oh, I would like to do this with you. What does it mean? And so it starts like that, often as a conversation. They call us. I remember PepsiCo calling us about 2 years ago saying, okay, we're really looking for a partner in Europe to see how we can accelerate. We've seen what you do, we we would like to know more of it. And then that's how we start the discussion. But we've never do hard selling or pushing because, if you go to people in the street, hey, you should go to the fitness, huh? I've got a fitness room, you should come, and I've got a gym, you need to subscribe. And even if you manage to convince them, they will subscribe, but they will not come to train. So what's the point? We'd rather have people coming saying, I really want to get fit. Okay, let's do it because we know the person's going to come to the gym. And that's the way we look at it.
Yeah. And do you advise them on the goals? Because
On the?
on the goals, because they have set really, many of these companies have set really ambitious goals.
Yes.
And maybe once you see them, you can say this is not achievable, or yes, we can help you get there, but you should put a lot of money into this, or yeah.
It's a good question because it is indeed a source of tension. The goals are often put with a wet finger in the air saying, oh, yeah,
The wind is blowing
2050 sounds good. It's always round numbers. I don't know if you've seen that. It's always
Never
2030. It's never
2049.
2017, or 20. No. So we try to create the path. What we see those goals as is more like a cape, like
North Star.
it's a North Star. It's a direction. We would like to get there, so it gets everyone in motion, and then we try to land more practical plans and then do what's doable. If we can, we advise them on the goals, but when they are already set, we are happy that already there are goals, because there are many companies that haven't got any goals. So you got a goal, okay, you climb the Everest, right, okay. Looking at how fit you are right now, you probably won't do it in the next 6 months. It maybe be in the next 5 years, but I think it's a noble ambition. Let's try. And if we don't get it, we can explain why, and we can
Explain
keep
what
going.
you're doing to
Explain
get
the
there.
journey.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so, in that sense of also explaining the journey and everything, how do you engage with all of the communications that these companies do, which are sometimes a little bit more misleading maybe than, because you guys are like fully transparent and very open and all of that, but companies aren't necessarily following those same guidelines as well.
So I would say not enough in my view, but I think with time it's going to increase. Why I say that? I think in the past companies would invent a marketing story that is completely disconnected from the field, from the story of the product. So you would have for, the powdered chocolate, you will have a little bunny or a rabbit, and the whole story is around the rabbit and the marketing and the publicity, and there are billions invested into making the rabbit look cool. Now, a lot of companies are like, well, why don't we talk about the products we're selling, the chocolate, the farmers, how it's being cultivated, the nature. And nature is, as the society grows more disconnected from it, products are the way to reconnect to them indirectly. So it's a way, something that you can use to reconnect to nature. So I think we see more companies coming to us saying, hey, what is it that we can do about the work we're doing? In this regard, I feel that they are generally very careful for two reasons. First, we don't want to oversell or promise anything we can't show, so that we hold them accountable on that. But on the other hand, regulation is coming, and there is a kind of green hushing in Europe happening, where if you promise too much that you cannot prove, you can be sued, and the legal risk is very seriously taken by those companies, and a lot of people would love to sue McDonald's and Nestlé, as you can imagine. So they are very careful in saying, okay, let's say just what we can really say and we can really prove. And I think that helps, making sure that there's not over-promising on that side.
That's super interesting, actually.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting to see where, for bigger companies, like governments and laws come into place in a much stronger way than maybe for smaller ones. Yeah, that's it.
And we've talked a lot about the companies. What is the transformation you see in farmers? Because you talk about these pioneers that are on the back of the room, that are like, let's work together, I already do it. But what's kind of the transformation when they don't do it and you're like, let's do this, you'll see it has results? Yeah.
So most of the programs that we do with farmers are voluntary. Okay. So you join the program if you really want to join the program. However, you always have more opportunistic behaviors where, there might be a premium, I'll join, but I don't change anything because I don't want to change anything. Or I'm not really taking interest, I'm not attending the trainings and things like that. The thing is, we don't measure progress by practices. So we don't try to say, okay, you'll get so much if you do these practices. We measure results. So with satellite imagery, for example, we look at days that the soil is covered. So, And you can compare with the average, and the thresholds of triggering a premium or not are parametered or related to how well you cover your soil. You do it the way you want, but it needs to be a live cover. Or if your cover is dead, it's not really useful. It doesn't show on the satellite image. It's not going to get you the results. So we set the results. The way to get there is your way. You choose how you do it as a farmer, but the performance of your practice is what we assess. If it doesn't work, or if you fail, you've got always a chance. If you genuinely tried, you've got a chance to catch up. But if you're cynical about it and you don't want, you just exit the program.
Okay.
And I think that that's only fair because there is investment, there is time that is put by a number of people on the other side. So it needs the same level of respect and commitment from the farmer. So we are never saying, the company is paying, therefore we need to be a bit kinder with the company. Or he's a farmer, he's a victim, we need to be nice with him because he's a small farmer. No, we take people, they are responsible for themselves, and there is no victim there. They are just people who have different interests. They've agreed to collaborate. They need to respect their agreement and their collaboration. It's a matter of respect to each other. That's how we try to approach it.
And mostly how it works between companies and farmers, it's paying a premium in the end, right?
So it's a mix of things.
Okay.
So what we realize is that there are three things that are important: measuring and having a good diagnosis at the beginning, and that diagnostic, soil health, carbon numbers, biodiversity, etc., satellite imagery, all this costs money, and often we need to get the company to support it, because it's a significant cost, but it's more like an in-kind support that the company gives. Then there's a whole training part where you have peer groups and you have experts coming in, and that also is a cost that the company takes on its shoulders, and the farmers take the time to go there. And then there is the actual incentivization about the performance or the risk that is being taken.
Okay.
And here what we try to do is to split that into small buckets that can land on the farm. Traditionally, every sustainability program is a responsible wheat program. So I give a premium for the wheat if it's done with XYZ practice. And the farmer does it for the wheat, and that's it. What we realize is with regenerative agriculture, because we're thinking systemically, we need to look at the whole farm. And as looking at the whole farm, if you ask that transition to be done on the whole farm, along the crop rotations, in between crops, to be just supported by the wheat, it's not doable. So what we try to do is to say, okay, the farmer's producing barley, wheat, sugar beet, potatoes. How can each actor from each crop, if it's McCain for the potatoes or if it's Heineken for the barley, how can they come and put a little bit of money that it's feasible for them, but when you sum it all across the rotation, it's a nice, interesting package for the farmer. And basically what we try to do at the moment is to get that to happen and then eventually have enough funding to do the three things that I mentioned: measuring, supporting, and then financially incentivizing. And the programs are mostly structured like that.
And do you mostly work with big farmers, or many times it's cooperative or very small farmers?
It depends. I would say there's all kinds of farmers. The size of farms in arable crops, annual crops like barley, wheat, etc., are generally larger than the cattle farms.
Pros and it's cons.
Yes, but we work in the southeast of France with farms that are 60 hectares in France, which is not a huge surface, and farmers that are not super technical but that are interested in transitioning.
I'm going to ask a bit more political one. How should the common agriculture policy align with all of this? Do you work in some kind of policy, or are you completely separated from this because you're working with the private side?
So our expertise, our know-how, our resources are not geared towards influencing policies because we're not good at that. What we try to do is to tie up with local governments or regions where they have funding, where they have opportunities that are, they want to improve the quality of water in a given area. How do we tie that up with the efforts of the private sector? However, we share a lot of what we do, like indicators and feedbacks from the field, with institutions that have an influence at political level. So we share with EARA, for example, which is the European Association of Farmers, and they try to influence the policy. We work with Claire Chenu from the Research Institute, Agricultural Research Institute in France, and she is influencing as an expert the European policies. We interact a bit with the Mission for Soil at the EU level, because they are interested by living labs and seeing what's being done in the field. But we are not actively lobbying or actively pushing or inputting. More like, okay, this is the experience, this is what we're learning, take it, use it, and we make sure that we are connected to the people that then do that influencing. Companies as well do influence the European Parliament as well in their ways through their public affairs and
More
people.
than we think.
I don't know, they have their topics, but what I'm positively surprised about is to see large companies like Nestlé pushing very hard for regenerative agriculture, pushing very hard for no deforestation, which maybe 20 years ago you would not have thought that they would be so pushy or leading that. But because they're doing it, they want also everyone to be doing it, and I think that's quite healthy.
What we're seeing now with the conversations around regenerative agriculture is that organic is falling out of the conversation. In these conversations with these companies, I remember one that I had with one of these companies that they said that organic it's super difficult to achieve in the volumes that these companies need. What's your take on this?
I would say that today it's not easy to both manage a soil cover, so the principles of soil health, which is covering the soil with vegetation. It means that you need to pilot the weeds very well, and it's difficult. It takes time and it needs a lot of mastering of the techniques. So it takes a few years, while on organic you are still working the soil and then taking out the weeds mechanically. And I think for me the objectives are aligned. So we should not at all oppose the two agriculture. We need to bring more of soil health principles into the organic farming, and then making sure that, and vice versa, and bringing the low pesticide use in that organic farming has into regenerative agriculture. What's wrong, I think, and this is why we like to talk about living soils or soil health, rather than talking about regenerative agriculture. Why? Because regenerative agriculture is like you're creating a new religion. And I always say that soil is, I said that last time, soil is like love in religions. There is soil in every agriculture, there is love in every religion. But if you become too crazy about a given practice, a given religion, that's integrism, and it's never too good, in my view. So what we try to approach is to say, farmers, when you are in a kind of conservation agriculture system, you should be aiming at reducing pesticides. Actually, we track some of those indicators. Because it costs you, it destroys life in the soil, so it destroys biodiversity. You've got no interest in doing that. So, and you can see farmers that are very advanced, they're very close to organic, or sometimes they are regenerative organic, but there are very few. So I don't think we should oppose them in the sense, oh, this is the new magic thing, regenerative agriculture, dump organic. No, organic's fantastic. The movement has led to a huge consumer awareness. It's created a lot of change in farms. But okay, the soil health is very important as well. Let's bring that into it, and vice versa.
Super interesting. Yeah. And I think my last question, I don't know how we're doing on time, but you were talking before about having healthy soils and how this impacts nutrients on food. When are we going to see kind of this made a public affirmation? Because we're all very scared about talking about how more healthy the products that are coming from regenerative or regenerative organic agriculture are. Are we going to get more and more data? Are these companies doing some research around this topic? We did a small piece of research based on existing research on relating these two, but we would love to see more of this to be able to kind of confirm that this is the soil health of this farm. So we believe this is going to have an impact on the products. Yeah.
So it's true that there are very few people working on that. But if you remember, 7-8 years ago, the experts on regenerative agriculture and agroecology were very few people. I remember a few figures like Bourguignon in France. They were talking about that. They were like ETs, who are these guys? They are against the current, etc. And we thought, we need more of this. And look at today, how mainstream almost it's become. I think we are experiencing the same thing about the human microbiome, if you want. We've rediscovered the microbiome of the soil, and we are rediscovering the microbiome of human beings and the relationship between both. There are a few organizations, I would say pioneer, who are doing some interesting work. If you take Dan Kittredge with the Bionutrient Association in the US, they're doing really good work, and they're starting to publish things with research that are proving that there are more polyphenols, antioxidants, and anti-inflammatory molecules in the plants. In France, there is a research institute in Rennes, in Brittany, that is doing some very interesting work, and they've published on tomatoes. They're going to publish on milk very soon, and the relationship not only between the crop and the nutritional density, but also between the nutritional density and the health, and how it's impacting the composition of the milk, the health, the microbiome of the baby when he's born, depending on what the mother's eating. They've done some trials and research that is going to be published in the coming month under the umbrella of a guy called Pierre Veille, who is doing that. It's fascinating. So I do think that this is going to emerge more and more. And I mean, logically, you've got a healthy soil with lots of, if you think about it, lots of nutrients, lots of life. There's lots of things the plants can absorb in comparison to plants being like almost like hydroponic in soil, where the soil is completely dead and you're just pouring all sorts of a part of what could be available in the soil when it's healthy to the plant. So I'm quite positive, and some companies are taking interest in that because they are fully engaged into the regenerative movement, and they're saying, well, we need to prove it. The quicker the better. So hopefully by having more people pushing in that direction, there is hope that it can be proven and demonstrated.
Because there's a huge message for the farmer that it's resilience in the farm, as you were saying, being able to kind of fight better plagues or have more healthy plants and things like this. But that will be a huge message for the consumer. Like this, if you source it from a healthy soil, you're going to be healthier, right? Yeah.
My personal belief is that the regenerative agriculture movement will not survive if it's just supported by carbon or carbon reduction of emissions. This is so abstract, it doesn't talk to anyone. Your health, the taste of the products you eat, that is a direct benefit to you, and that's how consumers can support it. And it's probably for a few cents, it's worth a lot of medical costs and pharmaceutical investments and things like that are here just to cure the issue, while you can easily prevent it for the well-being, all the chronic diseases that are coming through an inflammation of our bodies linked to our food, the food we eat. This can be completely changed by the quality and the anti-inflammatory properties that you find when a plant is living on a healthy soil, is growing on a healthy soil.
Lack of minerals that we all have nowadays.
Exactly. Yeah. So I do think that this actually will sustain the regenerative movement, and everyone who is interested, for close or far to this movement, organic, regenerative, I put everything in the same basket. Soil health in general, plant health, is going to is or should be making an effort to understand that link, because it is what will sustain the transformation on the farm, which is so great when we see it. So let's make sure the consumers feel it as well and benefit from it.
Yeah.
I said last one, but just another one. Going back to the beginning, I was very surprised to hear that you're a non-profit. How do you sustain yourself, I guess, through payments of these companies, and what do you do with the profits of Earthworm?
Okay, so we are non-profit, so we don't have profits. We make sure that we balance our accounts at the end of the year. They are public, so you can find them on our website. We are audited annually. When there is a little surplus, which sometimes happens but not often, we put it into a reserve that allows us to have a little mattress in case of hard times, but which is not that big. And then the way we function is that we agree with companies on what we're going to do together that year. We call it a membership model, which allows us to tackle a topic. and they pay for that. So about 80% of our funding comes from companies, and then 20% comes from public sector, philanthropists, donations, etc. We don't get donations from the general public, like other big NGOs like WWF or Greenpeace, etc. But we focus on getting companies to reinvest in their supply chain, and we find it's normal that they do that. The fact that we are a non-profit allows us not to have any investors telling us, you should do this, you should bring so much profit, so much turnover, so much revenue. So the financial KPIs are secondary to our impact KPIs. Okay. We want to sustain ourselves, sustain our teams, make sure we've got competent people on board, and that's the what's important for us financially. And then measuring our impact and what we do with that money is what's most important.
Super interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a fascinating conversation. There's so much to go through. We usually like to end the podcast with 2 traditional questions, and one of them is linked to the title of the podcast. So what is one thing that in your journey, and maybe in your journey with the TFT and now Earthworm, has really made you think, like, oh, what the field, like, what is going on, and given you that kind of sense of being lost or inspired or frustrated?
Oh, there's so many moments like that. One moment I think that was quite interesting for me is at the beginning of the no-deforestation journey. I was in Singapore facing all these suppliers, and the Nestlé buyer before the meeting said, "This is never going to work." And this guy was buying palm oil, and this was 14 years ago. And we were thinking, oh yeah, we should ask for traceability and no deforestation. And he said, this is a disaster. You don't get the industry. The industry is so complex, and the way it's structured, it will never change. And he told me that just before the meeting. And in the meeting, one of the suppliers said, yeah, we actually can do it. We could do it. Let's see, maybe. And so that's how we started the change. And that buyer became a big director of procurement, and he's become the biggest supporter over the time of the journey. So right after this meeting, he supported the journey very much, and he's been instrumental in transforming the industry. So it's funny to see how sometimes we don't believe or we think it's impossible, and then it becomes possible. So that was a cool story. But on a more macro, I would say what's happening on the cocoa sector at the moment is what the field, For years, we've talked to companies about paying more for the cocoa when the price was $2,500. And we could see there was no reinvestment being done in the field. The farmers had to get their children to work in Ivory Coast because they don't have enough money to hire workers. They don't replant. The plants are getting old, and this and that. Today, the price of the cocoa, it's the highest in 50 years. It's $10,000 a ton, so 4 times the 2,500 it's been up to date. And it's going to stay very high because all the plantations are sick, the farmers don't want to farm, there's climate change. So I'm thinking, why didn't you reinvest earlier in those fields as buyers? Why didn't you take interest? I mean, it would have been so easy to avoid that crisis. And this crisis is costing you so much today. So I'm like, come on, just do it everywhere. And it's not that much money compared to what you're going to pay if you don't do it. And that's what the field.
Yeah. But maybe it's something that will serve as an interesting lesson as well for later on, now that they've experienced the crisis. And I actually wanted to go back to something before we do the very last question, which is just to clarify kind of what a no deforestation policy really means. So we were saying the name is no deforestation policy, but there is still some like cutting down trees and clearing forests and stuff. So maybe it's worth just thinking about it now to clarify that for our listeners as well. What does that actually mean, no deforestation policy?
This is always the difficulty of semantics, because deforestation means you define what a forest is. And if you look at the FAO definition, it's like a huge paragraph which is not very operationalizable. The crown of the tree is below 5 meters, and you go in the jungle and you're like, what the hell? Is that a forest? Is that not a forest? Yeah. And so the idea was with Greenpeace, with scientists and with companies to say, okay, how do we classify a forest? And basically we came up with a stratification of various levels of degradation from the very primary forests that have never ever been touched by humans, which is almost no forest on this planet. Secondary forests then are forests that have been touched by humans. And within those forests, you have got a gradation of density from very degraded, like a few bushes, to still almost like a dense forest, a full jungle where you find orangutans, etc. So what we thought is, okay, where is the threshold where you say, okay, from that point it is actually a forest? And we did it by consulting different people. Of course, it's not a perfect methodology because then you contextualize it, and in Liberia or in Indonesia or in Brazil, it's not going to be the same thing. But we use that as a guide, and then trying to say, look at the landscape and to say what functionality are we trying to keep from a water standpoint, from a biodiversity standpoint, and then that gets to a landscape planning where the forest can be conserved and some agricultural area is freed up. So again, it's gray. It's not purely clear, but we wanted to mark the fact that when you adopt such a commitment, it means you follow that methodology. And when you follow that methodology, you know that a lot of forests will be preserved. And that's what is the difference with not having this policy. And this is why it was called no deforestation, because you really stop the deforestation that was happening. But yes, if you go in the detail, it's not black and white, because you go in a landscape and it's gray.
It could be called the forest preservation policy.
Yeah, so a lot of companies now, initially it was a no deforestation announcement, but nowadays more and more companies are calling it their forest conservation policy, which I think is much more appropriate, because you don't need to make the announcement effect like in the past, where you had many bulldozers clearing every day, to not doing that anymore. I think it's much more accurate for anyone to say, this is my forest conservation policy and this is how I intend to conserve forests.
Yeah. Personally, I prefer that.
Yeah, me too actually.
Perfect. I'm glad we clarified that before finishing the podcast. And so the last question would just be, is there like a book or another podcast or a song or a movie that you would recommend to everybody listening now that you found particularly inspiring or interesting?
Well, there's many, but I like very much the podcast from Koen van Santjen, Investing in Regenerative Agriculture. I don't know if I'm sure you know about it.
Chris has been on it. He interviewed
You've
her.
been on it, and I think is because he's really bringing the link between the health, the human health, soil health, farmers' perspectives, and from all angles of society. And I do think that this effort of regenerating soils and supply chain is a joint effort. It's not just one hero there, and I like that, and I like his very open and curious approach. So that's the one I'd recommend.
He's super cool.
And he's a great guy.
Yes, he's a nomad guy. Hello, Cohen. He's a huge reference for us.
Yes.
Yeah. Super.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was super interesting conversation, and I feel like a very different approach to what we have been talking about lately. We do talk a lot about regenerative agriculture, but I think the approach from the big companies and from nonprofit is very different to what we've been discussing. So thank you so much for giving us this approach. Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much.